Om Shanti Shanti. Amen. Welcome everybody to today's class. This is the fourth class on the topic of balance. And today it'll be the last class also in this class series. And as I promised in the beginning, I would like to answer questions during this last and final class. I want to start with some preliminary remarks, of course. But if you have any questions, please do submit them in the chat box. And after I finish my initial remarks, I do have a few questions already that have been submitted, and I'll begin with those. But as we go along, I may answer them quickly or not, depending how they go. But usually the case is that I must answer them concisely, because otherwise we could take whole session for one of these questions. They're quite complex. So today, I wanted to begin by just mentioning a few things that I skipped, you might say, or I didn't mention, but I wanted to include in our discussion about balance. And there's this concept in nature and in life in general known as homeostasis, and it's the coming into balance, of bringing things into balance. When things go too far left, too far right in natural systems, biology, and you could say the weather, things that natural forces, they're sort of built into the whole system, checks and balances. And the same thing is true in our individual life, but it's the same thing true out in the world at large. And in our individual life, obviously, one of the corrective measures that brings us or makes us aware that we need to be brought into balance is the fact that we suffer. We experience pain, sickness, illness, disease. These sorts of things are, you could say, sending us signals that something is amiss and we need to correct that. But the same thing also applies to some degree out in the larger world as well, in society as well, that we're out of balance when these things don't seem to be going as we think they should. We see society as the ills, just as we have ills of the individual, we have ills in society. And as time goes by, these things manifest as disruptions. So I always found this very, very fascinating. It's something that Paramhansa Yogananda once said. And to how much he meant it just strictly literally, and I wish that somebody would have followed up and asked him even further about how this works. But there was very terrible, in the 1930s, very terrible weather in droughts, and it was unusually bad weather conditions, and things were happening on a mass scale in the United States at that time, and in other parts of the world at large, the unusual bad weather. And Master said it's partly a result of the disturbances that was taking place in the Spanish Civil War at that time, and in the mid-1930s. And I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. Can you make a direct correlation between those? I have no idea. But nevertheless, when there is a disturbance, warfare, these sorts of things, we obviously know that something's amiss, something's wrong, and there's a corrective measure that somehow will have to balance those scales. And so I thought that occurred to me, and a couple of things that I thought to mention in that regard before we go to our questions and answers is, isn't it true that the Gita said when darkness prevails, and there is the descent of an avatar? So even Dharma, in that sense, it's mentioned in the Gita, it seeks balance. God responds when darkness prevails. And so in a sense, you could say imbalance is a manifestation of darkness of some sort. And in this age, you could say that masters in the macrocosm, the larger rhythms of life, the Paramhansa Yogananda said that we're entering into an age in which the world is seeking more balance. Of imbalance of Kali Yuga, we're now going into Dwapara Yuga, and there will be certain balancing effects will take place. East and West, he said, will come in more into the balance. The West has been specializing in materiality, the East specializing, India particularly specializing in spirituality, but they're imbalanced. They're not balanced. You see great poverty, or at least you have in the past, at least, great poverty in some countries and more in Asia. And whereas in America, you've got this material wealth, but yet you lack spiritual wealth. And so, or lesser so. So we need to bring these into balance. And so again, this age is one of bringing it into balance. You also find you find other imbalances. You see, Kali Yuga was a time of very strong masculine energy, material. It was a little, there's those qualities associated with masculine traits overemphasized. And so you're finding in here that the place of women in society is coming to the fore, and the female energy is more coming into the world. And we see that taking place around the world, that the role of women is changing and coming, perhaps, I hope, but I think it's true, the Master said this, so bringing it into balance. So these sorts of things are happening. And I think also you've seen a great deal of emphasis in the last decades on bringing the ecology, the movement in ecology, how there's things in the natural world are interconnected. And great progress technologically has been made over the last centuries, but also it's been at the expense of perhaps balance in the world of nature itself. And so this has been also one of the things that is being brought into balance. And you could say, just as in our individual karma, we have to bring, if it's happening for each one of us, we have to be coming in balance. So it is for the world at large. I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but there was one thing I remembered that Master had said to Swami Kriyananda when he came to him as a disciple. He said, you have good karma. He says, after many lifetimes, everything has balanced out now. And so, in other words, he could make great progress. He could find freedom in that lifetime if he applied himself, because his karma had come into balance. And I like to think this applies to any of us that are sincere devotees of a great master. Obviously, we're blessed to be able to have that opportunity to be close to a master and to be able to be given the techniques and the opportunity to express our discipleship to that great master. I like to think that perhaps our karma has been balanced to some degree to allow us to be able to do that. And I think we've been given the techniques. Now it's up to us to make use of those techniques. And I think Kriya itself will be an instrument to bring society into balance, and to bring some of this imbalance and harmonization. But when we speak about balance, often I want to live a balanced life. We think about the outer things. Well, I need to be a little bit more in this direction, and I need to take up perhaps these habits or these tendencies. And we think outwardly in terms of being balanced. But really, it comes down to inside, being balanced within. And what is Kriya? It's a technique to bring us into inner balance. And when we are balanced inwardly, we find that we begin to express ourselves sort of balanced outwardly. And when society has enough people that can bring inner harmony and inner balance into their lives, it too begins to come into balance. And so each of us individually has a role to play. And don't think, what can one person do? It doesn't take many to tip the scales. Most people, as Swami Kriyananda used to say, and even you can relate this to the topic of balance, he says most people in the world, some like this, some like that, it tends to all these tendencies tend to just simply balance themselves out, and nothing really changes too much. But if you have a few people with focus and concentration and are strong in a certain direction, that's enough to tip the scales. And so it was. He says, all great movements start just with a few people. And so in a sense, let's take that to heart as disciples at this moment in history, because we have that potential, joining our forces together, meditate and putting out light, and we can have a significant influence on this age to come. So with that, just those preliminary remarks, let's go into the questions that have been submitted. And I have 3 here somewhere. I have 3 here I'd like to start with, but like I say, you can add them into the chat box. And when I finish with these 3, then I'll go to those as well. And this first question is actually got multiple parts to it, so I'm going to break it down. And this one says, in the last class, you mentioned that when we are imbalanced, we tend to substitute willpower for devotion. This point was eye-opening. When I talk with some serious devotees about their bucket list, some of them say that they just want to do God's will, and they don't have a bucket list as such. Is this the right attitude? Now he goes on, which I'll come to later. But in this first sentence was, in the last class you mentioned that when we are imbalanced, we tend to substitute willpower for devotion. I don't think I said it quite like that, but let me clarify that. This balance between devotion and willpower can become imbalanced. We don't necessarily, when we are imbalanced, it's not necessarily, we can be imbalanced in many ways. It's not necessarily when we are imbalanced, we're going to do this, substitute willpower for devotion. But that is, I made that reference into about when I was speaking about fanaticism, is in our personal pursuits. And spiritual pursuits that require great willpower, like you think about the yogis that do tapasyas of one sort, or people who take up the spiritual truth, and they become very, I'm going to change this habit and use their willpower to push forward through obstacles. And I need to change in this way or in that way. There's a danger if you take it too far when the use of your will, that you can become so it can lead to self-absorption. And it's not a matter of either willpower or devotion, in which case you begin to lose. I mentioned that one of the dangers of overuse of just focusing on will is you can begin to lose your devotion. And it's not necessarily so. And it's not a matter of having great will versus having devotion. It's not either or. We want to have both. But the focus on will without devotion is something that'll eventually lead to an imbalance. It leads to dryness. And the heart becomes dry in the pursuit of the will. And you remember that story of the let's just say God sends Narada down and to check on a certain yogi, couple of yogis, how they're progressing. And the first one is a great yogi in the Himalayas, had done great tapasya, had great powers, had great willpower, and then the second yogi was a drunk, but he loved God. He was and in a sense, he was so attached and he was in love with God, and everything was motivated by that. But perhaps he drank a little bit. And when Narada went back to report on him, God complimented. He said that second one was the real devotee. Because he had love in his heart and he loved God. So that's more or less the point that I was making about that. And then the second part of that first question is when I talk with devotees about having a bucket list or things you want to see done, and we need to use our willpower to get those done. And some people don't seem to have that. They say they just want to do God's will and they don't have a bucket list as such. Is this the right attitude? Well, it's not a yes. Again, it's not yes or no. it's good to want to do God's will. Of course we do. But we have to act, and some people, as he's saying, some people just want to do God's will. Well, how is that will going to be manifested? And we want to do God's will, but God needs instruments. And each of us need to act. We can't be passive and think, well, God's going to do this all. God, tell me. And very few instances in this history of the spiritual path where God speaks from the clouds and tells down to the devotee, do this or do that. Oh, you hear these stories sometimes. I heard this voice commanding me. But we have to use our individual creativity, and then we use that individual creativity in some way. And if you want to say those are projects that we are on our bucket list of things to do in this lifetime, but do them not because for just ourselves. We want to please God. We do it, and let's do this because it's a good thing to do. This is going to help others. I can be serviceful. And so having a list of things and ways you would like to serve, there's no problem with that. But yet we can do it because God has gave us creativity, so let's express that creativity. You remember that story from the Bible where the master goes away and leaves his money with a couple of his servants, and one servant goes and buries it under a rock, and the other one goes and invests it and uses it and makes it prosper, and it increases. So when the master comes back after his long journey, the one who put the money under the rock gives him back his money, what he was given to care for. And the master says, okay. And then again, the second one gives him not only his money back, but more, because he had done something good with it, and it increased. And he said, that's the true devotee. He gave great praise to that one. And so we're given our talents, and that's symbolic of God gives us talents, not to hide it under a rock. That's where the phrase, don't hide your talents under a rock. And we're thinking talent, of course, in those days was a form of money. But talents for us, of course, is our talents, our abilities, and use them. And so, and creativity as we use them. So it's not an either or thing. We have to be the instrument of that. And of course, our natural creativity says, well, I could do that, and I could do that. But it doesn't have to be ego directed or for my self-aggrandizement. It could be something as a way to serve. And in serving and using our creativity, we find we're fulfilled. Master said an interesting thing. He says, some people think, well, we should be humble and we shouldn't be ambitious. He said, no. Be ambitious. Be ambitious for God. And that's not only directly finding God. I want to find self-realization. That's being ambitious. But he said, in whatever you do, be ambitious to do it well, do it prosperously, do it increasingly, because do it with the spirit of increasing and expanding, and your own consciousness helping others, and be an instrument that way. So that's more along the lines that I think is being said here. But do we become more egotistic when we practice willpower? Could be. It doesn't have to be, but it could be. Willpower, because willpower is essential. We have to have willpower. We put our will to work in order to attain something. Willpower is God-given to us to be able to uplift ourselves, to use our will and be guided, use it rightly. Now, willpower can be used egotistically as well, and we need to use our will in the proper way. We need to try to attune our will to God's will, intuitively put ourselves into alignment. And how do we know God's will? Well, we probably make a lot of mistakes, and you learn from those mistakes. That's not it. And then you finally learn, but ultimately it comes, it's that development of that intuitive ability to feel yourself acting in a sense of joy. When you can act and feel joy, pure joy, not just I'm happy because I'm pleased, but to experience God's joy is ultimately in high spiritual state. You feel God's joy in every moment, in every action, so that you go through your day and you feel that joy. And when when you act in life in the consciousness of divine joy, of divine love, in divine peace, and any of these divine qualities, when you act in that consciousness, your actions will be automatically guided by the divine. You're acting in that joy. And so you're in other words, because you're in tune with the divine. And actions done with pure attunement are going to be actions according to God's will. And this is so, consequently, it's actions not in tune, you could say, are going to be guided by ego. So but again, we're on a scale, it's directional. We don't all of a sudden, we're doing things egotistically and all of a sudden we turn into the other. It's going to be something that gradually, as your intuition, as your spiritual development begins to grow, you'll begin to act more according to God's will. So finally then, how can I balance my desires with my quest for God, my work, as well as some more, how can I balance my desires with my quest for God, my work, as well as some more wrong desires? Okay, here we go. How can you, my quest for, again, here we have an either or, maybe these questions from the same person, where we're setting up a dichotomy between my will versus God's will, you might say. It's either or. I'm either seeking God or I'm not seeking God. Now, maybe in a pure philosophical sense, you could say yes. Anything not of God is, of course, probably egotistical, but nevertheless, when we act, think in terms of what can I do? Is my action in a positive? Am I going in a positive direction? I would even say here that be kind to yourself. It's like people think, oh, that's not, that's not purely godly. I must be bad. Well, that's as Swami Sri Yukteswar said, throw the dog a bone once in a while. And I think don't be too hard on ourselves. Are we going in a good direction? Are we sincere in our efforts? Are we making progress? I remember I was given a piece of advice by a person who just passed away here last week at Ananda village. Some of you may have known her. Her name was Mary Kretzmann, and she was in charge of the Ananda Sangha, healing ministry in America, but she reached out worldwide to people around the world. And I remember giving a very good piece of advice because you're asked, how can you help other people? How, perhaps someone's suffering from this, suffering from that, as she was often asked, how do I heal myself? And he says, in every moment of your life, do something, if you have to make a decision, do something positive. Is the decision that you're going to make in this moment positive? It's going to take you in an upward direction. It's going to take you toward betterment. Is it? And he said, then after you do that, and then after you do that, do another thing. Ask yourself again, the next moment, do something positive that's going, and you don't know if it's positive, but you think it's positive. You're sincere in your efforts. It gives you a sense of peace, of joy, of a little bit happiness. Yeah, that seems right. Moment by moment. You can't think down the line, is this the ultimate good? You have to think what's right in front of you. And this is your Dharma, you could say. Your Dharma is right in front of you. Do something positive, and you will then begin to move in that direction. And so the question here again is, how can I balance my desires with my quest to God? Try to include them. And I've given this advice maybe earlier in one of the other classes. Remember what Swami would say, is they have desires. You just can't pretend you don't have those desires. You do have the desires. So your choice is to be, suppression. That's not going to work. So can you fulfill those desires in a positive way, taking you in a direction you want to go? Even if you have bad habits, don't identify with those bad habits. But let's say you're an alcoholic. Yes, remember this. Remember the story of the devotee who was an alcoholic. He was doing his Kriya Bond. He would do Kriya, and then he would take a sip of whiskey. And he would do his Kriya for a little while, and they'd take another sip of whiskey until finally his devotion was strong. And finally, he got so much joy out of doing his Kriyas that he threw the whiskey aside. You can see it's a directional thing here. He's moving in the right direction. I mean, it's that advice that Swami gave. He says he would like nice things. And so he would see something beautiful. He was a world traveler going from here to there, sharing master in different countries. He says something very beautiful. And you've probably done this. And you go in the airport, they got all these nice gifts, when you're, you're going to leave. You say, whoa, what isn't that very nice? And so sometimes he says, I really wanted that. I felt some desire for that nice shawl or vase or whatever it might be. So he says, so I would buy it. And I would enjoy it for a little while, then I would give it away. And I'd think of somebody that who would also enjoy that. He said, he gave this advice about gift giving. If you're going to give a gift, give something that you enjoy, you like, and give something that another person would like. And you're sharing your joy with that other people when you do that. And so think of your desires that way. Now sometimes we have like less nice desires, and those sorts of things, you could say bad desires are desires when fulfilled are going to lessen your joy level ultimately. May not seem so right at the beginning, but eventually it is. And so to the degree that we can, we move away from that. But don't beat yourself up you have to, life is a series of small steps. And so think in those terms, in those ways. Okay. In other words, do good things more and focus on that. Could you elaborate on the balance between giving to others and thinking about myself or yourself in terms of money, time, and material things? Should I simply give as much as possible away in the name of non-attachment? Well, again, this is not an either or here, but not necessarily. Now remember, if you've been given something, life, your karma, your family, if you've been gifted something, prosperity, success, but let's say money here is being asked, he says, in a sense, you have been given a responsibility also to use that money, to just give money away heedlessly. You have to consider the consequences. You've been given energy. To just throw the energy away may be wasteful. To give that energy to somebody who cannot handle that and use that in a good way is also perhaps even harmful. And ultimately, if you dissipate it in one of those two ways or just self-indulgence, you're basically going to lose the magnetism that had drawn that energy to you in the first place, which is not what we want. We want to have that magnetism, the magnetism that can attract prosperity, material prosperity to you, can also be used to draw higher things to you, can draw friends to you, can draw good circumstances to you, can draw spiritual value to you. So these things, you don't want to, money in and of itself, there's nothing, it's just energy. And so treat it with respect. And I think the best thing to do is to use money, to use prosperity, to use these things for the betterment of other people around you so that it makes life better. The fact that you can, some people say, well, I'll use it, but I don't want to make myself better because there's a certain guilt factor there. And I think that's a little bit of attachment here. The fact that you happen to be riding on the wave while helping others, that's not wrong. It's not being self-absorbed in it. Don't be attached to these things. That's the thing. Can you be happy when you're sad? When circumstances are not favorable to you? The money goes away, you don't have money. Can you be happy? Well, I think so. I can be happy. Then the same question is, can you be happy when money comes to you? Wealth, prosperity. Some people would say, well, it's a burden. I don't want it. Well, I can understand that as well. So consequently, if you can't handle money, perhaps you find somebody who you entrust it to, who can use it and do a good thing. But you don't just giving away, you don't abandon the responsibility. So you have a responsibility to do something. And if you can't personally do it, well, allow others to do it and you can give it to them. So just like here we have, we've created this foundation here, the Janaka Foundation, that people bequest their perhaps estates, when they die, they give their estates in their wills and so on. People give that, and something they can give to it while they're still alive too. They've inherited quite a large sum of money. They don't know quite how to best use it, but they know, I'll give it to the Janaka Foundation, and the Janaka Foundation then has a board of directors, and we give worthy projects that serve Master's work. We give that to that. So there are ways to do that, but just to abandon it, to give it away heedlessly is not always necessarily the right thing to do. And so, because we do have the responsibility, what we want to be is we want to be non-attached to it. And if we can do something serviceful at the same time, why not? Why not do that? Now I have other question here. It's been submitted. How to stop procrastination? Now, of course, I would rather get questions that are having to do with balance, because that is so let's just say how to balance my life between over busyness and versus procrastinating. I think in a sense, I think maybe you could relate procrastination to a willpower, just putting off until tomorrow. Put off to tomorrow what should be done. Don't put off to tomorrow what you need to do today. And I think you could say procrastination. In the larger sense, all of us are procrastinating. That's a tongue twister. Because in a sense, we're procrastinating our kinship with God, our journey to God. We're putting it off tomorrow, what really should be done today. And so I'm going to answer it on the spiritual level, but that applies to the day-to-day little things there are certain things in life we have to do. And there's certain things of our soul needs to do in order to be fulfilled. And that's ultimately self-realization, God realization. That is going to nag at us until we fulfill that. And that nagging becomes suffering eventually. And we can just put it off until the suffering becomes so unbearable that we have to do something. And that's often the case for many. And so you could sort of say that I'm not going to procrastinate cleaning up the house. Well, you can put it off until finally you can't stand it anymore. And there's consequences. The neighbors, you have all the junk in the yard, you're not cleaning it up, you're getting complaints. Life itself will begin to hammer it on you. And so why go about life like that? Why not take the initiative? And we find that the spiritual path, this is about, we need to take the initiative at some point. We're awakened to that need. But until we're awakened to it, and usually it takes suffering to wake us up. And so, but we don't have to do it that way. We could take the initiative. We could use our willpower to do something. But most people don't seem to do that. But I think a devotee gets to the point where they say, enough is enough. I'm gonna do something about this situation. So let's apply this question about procrastination. Let's think of it in the large terms, in terms of our spiritual life. You can go on for incarnation after incarnation after incarnation. It's your choice. And some people say, well, I just want to play. That's all I want. I don't want to do all this work. I don't want to find God. I just want to play. Divine Mother says, that's fine. Go for it. And then you reap the consequences. You reap the karma. Now, that's one way to look at the spiritual path. But the other way that I think is even better is to get a taste of what it's like to actually seek God. And then it's not a matter of just avoiding suffering. It's a matter, I want that. And to get that, I've got to do something. And so become so attractive. Life is so attractive, you want nothing else. I think I said this last week about dispassion, this quality of being dispassionate. Not that. I'm not going to be attracted to any of that. And I'm going to not allow myself to be drawn into Maya and all of that. It's one way to approach the spiritual path, has its value. But true dispassion is that positive side of tasting something that's so attractive that your mind will not go anywhere else. There's nothing else that's going to satisfy you. And that's what we want. You become drunk for God. And that's what if we want to overcome procrastination, think in terms of the positive things that we could find in life, the positive benefits of whatever it is that we're procrastinating about. And if you really want that, wouldn't it be so nice if and that wish for that supersedes all of the reasons why you won't do that. We won't go out. So, second question is how to bring healing energy into my life. Well, I think we have to ask the question here, what is healing energy? Healing energy is energy that's going to bring us back into harmony with, and if we think physically, harmony with our physical situation, harmony with those things that have brought disharmony, is what is that energy that's going to resonate with that harmonious? What is harmony, really? Harmony is cooperation. Harmony is love, you could say on a very high level. Harmony is God contact. Those things that are going to resonate with expansion, with joy, those energies that have that resonance, these are the things that are going to heal us. Ultimately, wisdom brings us into harmony, is because wisdom is you could say, the opposite of ignorance. The destruction of ignorance brings us into a state of wisdom, making the ability to make good choices. The quest for light as opposed to the temptation to sink into darkness. All of these energies, depending upon your particular predisposition, these are what will bring us into balance. Seeking balance in life, harmony and balance, is healing. Think in terms of other people, forgetfulness of the self in the embracing the well-being of others is healing. We come into harmony when we forget the little self and we begin to think of others before we think of ourselves. This is healing as well. And so consequently, to if we were to say to bring healing energy into our life, it's the basic spiritual principles that we talk about in all of our sanghas. Less self-absorption, more expansion, to think away from the little ego and to embrace others, to be embracive, to grow, to have joy, expand into that. This is healing energy. And so Do we have any more? I'm going to ask Bharat if we have any further questions. I'll.
Hi, Jaya. Yes, there is some questions in your chat, if you can see.
I didn't catch that. Now, you're going to have to say that again.
Yes, sorry. There is some questions in your chat box, if you want.
Oh, there are some questions in the chat box? Oh, okay. Oh gosh, there's a bunch of them. Okay, I'm reading from the bottom. If someone else has, we are told sometimes to stand up for ourselves and sometimes to accept everything that comes to us without fighting it. How do we balance our need to stand up for ourselves and yet follow? It's. I don't think there's a. Is there really a dichotomy to stand up for yourself and accept everything that comes to us without fighting it? You don't have to stand up for yourself. Is in itself is opposing what is. If you just stand up for yourself, that's not necessarily fighting. That's you don't have to fight. You just have to stand up for yourself. I mean, and sometimes, of course, if you want to think of physical confrontation, but that it's most of the time just respecting oneself, being firm in one's desire to be honorable, to do the right thing, to do dharma, is just the natural thing we should do, and it doesn't have to be directed against somebody else. Now, practically, I know it is. You see something wrong going on, and you stand up. Something is you're standing to stand up for truth. So you see, it's the positive. You don't have to be in terms of against something else. Let the other person, if that's what's the case, is let the other person think of it in terms of confrontation. But to just stand up for the light is just who we are. That's who we are. We don't have to personalize it in terms of some other person. Now, the other person may see it as in oppositional terms, but I don't like to start the conversation from that point of view. But you do have to, it's like Master says in the story of the snake. You don't have to bite, but he didn't tell us not to hiss. But I think the question here is being impersonal, is stepping back and not taking things personal. It's a matter of upholding dharma, and this is and sometimes that means having to do actions that perhaps are counter to the will of other people. You're not fighting them; they just happen to not like what you're doing, and you're having to go against their will. But if you feel that you're in the right, sometimes you do find opposition, and sometimes you do have to oppose that opposition, but you don't have to make it personal. You're fighting for truth, you're fighting for rightness, you're acting in such a way that is going to bring that. Now, I understand, and I'm not naive, that sometimes that may bring negative consequences to you in the sense that let's say your boss is, you're being bullied, and you stand up for yourself out of self-respect. You're not, or somebody else is being bullied, and you're standing up for them, and of course you may end up having to suffer the consequences of that. But that's the choice you have to make. Are you going to allow the bullying to continue, or are you going to find a way to oppose it and help the other person that's being bullied, or perhaps even to help yourself? Now, you have to, perhaps you have to be clever. You have to use strategy. You just don't sacrifice yourself on the altar of doing some foolish activity, but you oppose it. If darkness is there and it's in your lap and it's for you to deal with, it's your dharma to do that. But don't do it indiscriminately. You have to discriminate. What is the right thing to do here? But be impersonal about it. Don't be reactive. People see things happening and they get emotionally reactive. You have to do this from a point of discrimination and a certain amount of wisdom in your actions. But take action if something is not right. You find the way to rectify it. So the question is here is to stand up for ourselves. Yes, but not from an ego point of view. Not because a lot of people, they get their feelings hurt and they feel, well, I got to stand up for my emotional reactions. What are you standing up for? Is it for truth or is it for your hurt feelings? Think about it. Okay, let's see. How do I balance my thirst for God and my thirst for God and my friends and family's lack of understanding of my new God-oriented life? When do they become the kurus? Oh, I think what we're being spoken of here is family opposition to our quest for the spiritual life, taking up the spiritual life, finding God. We have a duty to our family. We can't ignore that. We do have a duty to our family, but our family has a duty to us also. And the fact that we're trying to find and if you take it out of the realm of religion and just thinking in terms of perhaps that previous topic we were mentioning, we want to be an instrument for truth. We want to be an instrument for rightness. We want to be an instrument for goodness. We want to be an instrument for bringing joy to other people. And let's say our family opposes that. Well, there comes a point where we have to ask that question that Christ posed to his disciples: who is your mother? Who is your father? It's God. God and the Divine Mother. These are your mother and your father, and you have to serve God and gurus. And now, to the degree we can, we make accommodation for our biological family, and we try to see serving God and guru in our mother, in our father, and our brothers and sisters. But to the degree, if there comes a point where there's confrontational opposition to that, I don't think there's much of a choice. We have to accommodate as best we can, but we have to serve God and gurus as well. Now, we have to be clear in ourselves. What does that mean? Serving God, serving gurus, serving love, serving light, bringing goodness. Now, if your father is a mafia boss, should I serve him or should I serve something else? You can see now but for most people it's not that clear. We have to use our discrimination, because usually, what do your parents want? What does your family want? If they're spiritual, they want your higher welfare, and truly that's usually the case. It's just hidden behind those petty desires, family attachments that families tend to have. They're hiding behind that, but usually they love you. They want to see you prosper. They want your welfare. And so if you can, in a sense, bring about understanding, mother, father, I know you love me. I love you. But in terms of my higher welfare, my love for God is something that cannot be denied. And so but again, don't bring the argument to an absolute either or. Can we not find accommodation here? Can we not find some balance? And you, as a child with your parents, you owe it to them. It's your familial duty to at least make the effort. But of course, there comes a point where you cannot abandon your spiritual life, your spiritual quest. And you can only take that accommodation so far. So you have to make the effort to that. And I think all of us, to some degree or another, have faced that. Our parents, family have been disappointed in us because we didn't follow the traditional path. Well, you won't be the first one, nor the last one, to have to face that. But I've found, practically speaking, what parents, as I said, really want is they want your welfare. They want your true happiness. And if you follow the spiritual life, finding God and following your guru's, the path of your guru, if you demonstrate that your life is successful, you're happy, you're joyous, you continue to love your family, you haven't abandoned them, you want to include them, that in time the parents come to see that you made the right decision, and usually things work out for the best. Okay, I think, is that the last one? Okay, can we use our low moments to help us love God more? I hope so. I've done that. I think sometimes when we're at our lowest points, we're forced in a way. I have, everything's like sand. It's gone through my fingers and I hold nothing. And you feel depressed. Who do we have to turn to? It's God then is there. And you remember the story of the Buddha and the courtesan. Courtesan wanted Buddha's love, and she was a disciple, really, but she wanted more than just being a disciple. But Buddha said, but someday I will come to you. And eventually time passed, and all of a sudden he was, many years later, inspired. And he jumped up from his meditation and he says, I must go. The courtesan, whatever her name would be, she's calling me. I must go to her. And he ran off to her. And of course, all the disciples were aghast. My God, he's abandoned his meditation. He's abandoned his practices. And he's running off to the courtesan. And so they ran after him, and sure enough, he ran to the courtesan, but now years had passed and the courtesan, her beauty had gone, her health had gone, and she was on her deathbed. And he took her in his lap, put her head in his lap, and he says, my love, I've come back to you. I have come, to now at a time when you need my presence. You have my love. And guided her out of that body into the next life or into the astral world. His love was with her, but it was on an elevated level. And in a sense, this is how we should be with our family. We maintain the love. And when they're ready to receive that love and when they need that love, we're there to offer it to them. We never let it go. And because this family's been given to us. Friends have been given to us in a sense, but the family particularly has been given to us by long karma, and perhaps sometimes adversity, differences has brought us back together again so we can help one another. So that's why goes to the root of why it's said that if we can find freedom in this lifetime, so too our generations 7 years back, 7 years forward, are also blessed and helped that way. And of course, those family that are receptive to those blessings will be the ones who really benefit. And the real family of that person who attains that self-realization is the disciples. That's who our real family is. It's our spiritual family that ultimately carries with us lifetimes after lifetimes. Guru, disciple, and our fellow disciples in Guru Bhais. I'll leave it at that. I want to thank all of you for accompanying me on this journey in this discussion of the topic of balance and other things that we've covered. I hope again next holiday season will come now, and after the holiday season passes, we'll come back again with another subject. If you have topics you would like us to address, please contact Bharat, and you can suggest those to him, or you can even send emails to me. And if you have further questions, send me an email. Bharat can give you that email address, and I will try to get back to you. I'm not always quick with my answers. Sometimes I have to think about them, but I will answer. So if you want to send me an email, please do so. So God bless all of you, and may you have a happy holiday season, a joyous holiday season. May we touch one another in the all-day meditation, that we have this year at this time of year. God bless all of you. Joy to you.